To chapter 5. Now, we've considered the church's role in toleration, and now it's time to balance the argument by considering the magistrate's role. Magistrate is the word Locke always uses for the public official, whoever holds the power of government. Members of the legislature, judges, policemen. All of those come under the general category of the magistrate. And as always, Locke wants to balance his argument so that it works for both groups, those who care most about religion and less about the world in this life, and those who care most about the material world in this life and less about religion. He wants to talk to both of them at once. So we balance the argument, and as always, his logic goes back to first principles. That what is the magistrate? Well, here he gives a negative definition. The magistrate is not the one who is concerned with the care of souls, but is rather the one in charge of making laws, but not naturally things that we're free to do or not do. That's church business. So I emphasize this because I think we can learn certainly about toleration from reading this book. What more important topic is there? We can learn what Locke says, but it will be useful to you if you pay close attention to how he says it and how he builds up a persuasive argument. The first means to be persuasive, the first way to convince other people, or even simply to be clear, to say what you mean. The first advantage in that is to know what you're talking about, to have your own ideas clearly in mind. And that Locke does very well by making his fundamental decisions about his topic in the clearest way he can, and always being true to those, always remembering his logic. And so we study this book both for what it says and what that can teach us, and also for the way he says it, because that can teach you very important things. Now, for the reading question, the forum where I expect you to post an answer, we have this passage, the right column of page 11, chapter 5, the first page of chapter 5. Locke creates an imaginary reader who argues back against him. And I want you to understand that argument and explain how Locke overcomes it. I'm going to leave that up to you. But again, you can learn a lot from Locke's method as well as what he has to teach, what he says. And his way of making a good argument is always to make the strongest possible objection to his own argument that he can think up. He's always thinking about what someone might say to him, and there's the little marker, you may say. You'll see that at the top of the passage. That shows that he's going to let this other person speak. But it's part of intellectual discipline. And again, knowing what you're talking about to be able to make the strongest possible argument that you can against your own ideas. If you really want to write well and you really want to be persuasive and indeed just to know what you're talking about, then you will have a more powerful mind for creating objections to what you say than the people who are listening to you. And if you can manage that, then you will do well in all of your communications, and you will be able to say truly that you know what you're talking about. And that is a very important thing in life. So, as I say, we're going to turn to that later, but there are a couple different things that I want to bring to your attention from Chapter 5. Here's the first, here on the first page, which I now see is page 10, the first page of Chapter 5. We have another of these arguments that he invents from somebody else's mouth, somebody else's words, and you see the sign, you say, circled in yellow. And so he's imagining an objection to his ideas about toleration, to his defense of toleration as best for governments and churches. Obviously, the church has a very important thing to do. He doesn't neglect that part. You could always make an argument for toleration by saying that religion is not important. It doesn't matter. But that is not how Locke wants to argue. He always wants to make his argument work for strongly religious people as well as people who care about other things. So he starts from the premise that what religion deals with, that the soul, the next life, are highly important, maybe the most important thing in human life overall. And then the objection he imagines is, suppose people don't take care of their own souls. Wouldn't it be proper for the government to do something about that? After all, when parents neglect their children, then the government will step in because it thought that society can't afford that. And so when people neglect their own souls, wouldn't it be right and proper for governments to step in and to make sure that they take care of this most important thing? And Locke's way of arguing back against that is to think what we do in the case of people who neglect their health, or he says here their estate, which is to say their money and their property. Don't we let people make up their own minds in these most personal decisions? It's not that we think health is unimportant. It's not that we think that money, wealth, property are unimportant. But governments care about the public good and not individuals. And if they can manage not to worry about people's health or their investments and money, can't government also allow people freedom to fix their own souls as they see best? And here he makes a strong metaphorical argument. Let us suppose that you were living very sick. Now, the counter-argument against toleration that he's intending is that religious people imagine that we all are, in a way, sick. We all are living this limited life, and we need to find our way to heaven. We don't have infinite time and infinite opportunities. This is the difficult situation that argues that tolerance is something we can't afford. If you could get into heaven by any way, if it made no difference, there'd be no excuse for being intolerant. If there were many, many ways, then there'd be less of an excuse for being intolerant, because people would have lots of leeway to do different things and still attain their goal. But serious religious people may imagine that there's just one way. And if there's only one way, then shouldn't the government help people to it? This is a strong argument against toleration. Locke's way is to... Then again, let's compare that to health. Suppose, as I say, you had a grave sickness, a wasting disease, and it's something that is slowly destroying you. And you think that there's only one kind of cure, but you don't know what it is. This is a good metaphor for how religious people see this life. We are all on the way to a temporal and even a permanent death. Our resources are limited, and we need to find the way to get there. There seem to be only very limited choices, but we can't quite be sure which ones are correct. In that situation, would you want the government to take over people's health? If you had the same thought, this person is dying, maybe I am dying, I don't know what I have to do to cure myself. I think I have to do things just right in order to save my life. would I then welcome the interference of the government if they didn't know any better than I do? After all, I can't expect them to care more about my health than I do. We know from watching how governments and people that many people do destructive things. Many people fail to have proper concern for their health. And we're all easy about that. We think that's not at all the government's business. And if we can be tolerant in that situation, can't we be tolerant in the religious situation? One other part of chapter 5 that's worth our attention before we move to the paragraph that concerns the discussion forum question, the formal reading question, comes up on the last page. I've shown you page 12, the bottom of the left-hand column. Locke mentions something that sincerely religious people ought to keep in mind as the advantage of toleration from their point of view. And what he says is something that seems to be well represented in history, or proved by the facts of history, and you can consult your own historical understanding to see whether you agree. But what does he say? When there is no toleration, then the power of the government is mixed with the opinions, the doctrines of the religious institutions. And in that mixture, which of course Locke thinks is improper because it's mixing up things that should naturally be kept apart. But in that mixture, who's got the biggest influence? Who actually has the strongest pull? If you fail to practice toleration, is it that religion has too big an influence over government? Or is it the other way around? It's that government has too big an influence over religion. So that is why this is an argument that appeals mostly to religious people, because Locke is going to tell us it's the second thing is true. When you improperly mix them, then you don't maintain the balance. And when you don't maintain the balance, one party wins out. It's got too much influence, and that tends to be the government over the church. So if you are sincere about religion, you have a strong reason to want to practice these rules of tolerance, which say that no government power should be lent to religious institutions, because it's a way to keep your religious institution what it is, rather than setting up a situation in which it's subordinated to government. Now, that, as I say, is Locke's conclusion. It's the government that makes its influence known over the church or whatever religious institution. This is the continuation of the argument still on this last page of the chapter, top of the right-hand column. You may remember these examples that he's going over from Civ 102. He uses what for him are local examples in the great struggle between the English government and the English church, the Catholic Church at times, during the long transition from England into a Protestant country. What happened? Was it that the government betrayed itself, forgot what it was supposed to be doing, and left aside its natural power and gave extra power to the church? Is that the way it worked out? And Locke says, no, it worked the other way. It was the church that forgot what its business was and what it naturally should do, and left aside its natural power, which is to say the purity of its ideas and its doctrine, and its clear view as far as it can to see what way to get to heaven. And if you are very religious, you should be in favor of tolerance, he says, so that your church can be at its best, your religious institution can do what it naturally does in the best way. So what's left is for us to consider the reading question. And let's move to that now.